Hi everyone, it's Guillaume from Startup Basecamp. Welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. During the show, you will have the opportunity to meet the best climate tech founders, investors, and experts from both Silicon Valley and around the globe. They will share with you their stories and personal journeys into this growing and exciting industry, giving you some insight into the ecosystems that help you to take part in the fight against climate change and benefit from the opportunities it can represent. The podcast is divided in two small interviews. During the first part, you will get to know our speakers, their perspectives on the climate crisis and how climate tech is changing the game. The second part of the discussion will be for members of our community who will learn the speakers' secret sauce on how to and share with you their unique expertise on topics such as fundraising, management, strategy, and so on, to help you to become a better leader in your field. So before we start, I would like to quickly share what we are doing at Startup Basecamp to support climate tech founders in accessing resources and gaining visibility with investors they seek. Our initiatives include a membership-based community platform offering access to a dedicated Slack group with a growing number of founders, experts, and investors from around the world, and a series of exclusive content such as interviews, weekly job listings, events, and our quarterly online pitch of night opportunity. But more than a place where you can learn, exchange, and grow, we are building a matchmaking service to facilitate connections between our members and top investors and experts in the field. And soon, alongside with other top investors, we will be launching a small fund to co-invest in the growth and acceleration of our members. Finally, all of this is possible because of your support and donations. We are a small self-funded team, and we want you to be part of this collective movement against climate change. So please share one episode with a friend and subscribe to the channels. As an added bonus, we will plant a tree for each of our subscribers each time we reach 1,000 new fans or donors. Do not hesitate to connect with me via social media or email guillaume@startupbasecamp. Thanks a lot for listening. I hope to get in touch with you soon. And now, let's go for the show. Hi everyone, in today's episode we are speaking with Caitlin Wale, Senior Associate at Counteract. The UK-based fund, started by three serial entrepreneurs, invests in and supports pre-seed and seed carbon removal founders in their fight against climate change. The firm targets to build a portfolio of companies that will have the potential altogether to remove 5 gigatons of carbon by 2050. I was excited to have Caitlin on the show, an incredible woman who grew up in South Africa, where she started working in the mining industry as an engineer and ended up investing in and supporting early-stage climate tech founders by joining Counteract. Caitlin will share her extensive knowledge in a deep overview of the carbon removal ecosystem today. You will learn the 6 different areas where natural processes and technology can accelerate carbon capture. She will also cover their carbon capture potential for each of those areas, some of the existing methods, challenges, and benefits that are associated with each of them. And I have to admit, I learned a ton, and I feel each of those areas could be a deep dive episode in itself. Then she will cover in detail how they select and support founders and how they measure the impact that they base their investment decision on. She will go on to highlight underdog areas in carbon removal in which she sees exciting potential for investment and growth. Following that, Caitlin will share a view on the important role women can play in the climate tech ecosystem and how you can be involved in the growing climate tech movement today. In the second part of the show, Caitlin will give a secret sauce for founders looking to fundraise and pitch investors successfully. Lastly, Caitlin will cover how she tackles challenges to maintain a healthy work-life balance and share a few inspiring authors and shows to listen to. Caitlin, welcome to the show. Hi Caitlin, welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. I'm super happy to have you here with us today. And for many reasons, I have to admit. First, we were in the same on-deck climatic batch last summer, and during that time, I had the chance to exchange with you at numerous opportunities and have very interesting conversation. But also, you're an expert in carbon removal in the carbon removal market, thanks to your position at Counteract, which is a very exciting subcategories in the climatic industries. And I think more importantly, you are part of this growing number of incredible women fighting climate change. So welcome to the show.
Wow, thank you, G. That's quite a list, but I'm very grateful to be here and discuss this with you and excited to see where it goes.
So before we start, as usual, could you give us a 30-second introduction about Counteract?
Yeah, for sure. So Counteract exists to catalyze carbon removal, and we aim to start with 5 gigatons by 2050. And this is part of the mission of helping pre-seed and seed stage companies overcome the very early barriers by providing them with support both in the capital front, but also through help with commercialization, communications, and community.
Okay, so let's start from the top. As I mentioned to you before, we always love to put the human back into the center of the interview. So, can you tell us a bit more about your personal story and background? I mean, what are you passionate about? What do you do besides working and supporting and investing in founders? I mean, what makes you feel inspired or like your best self? Who is Caitlin in a way?
Thanks for the question. Um, so I think my story is very much founded in South Africa, which is where I'm from, and lucky to be here at the moment. I wasn't sure what route I wanted to take in kind of the working world, as I think with most people is the case. Um, and I was a very passionate dancer, but it turned out I ended up having knee injuries that pushed me away from that at the time that I was choosing. So I followed a kind of engineering route that my family did because what else did you do when you came from that family? And that was really helpful because it was very much based on first principles. And I think a good way to kind of be taught how to think and learn and very applicable to different industries. I then kind of moved into the engineering world in mining, and I quickly found actually through the process of elimination that that wasn't it didn't feel true to kind of what motivated me. And I say that kind of growing up in South Africa made a big impact on me. I think you are faced with such extremes, extreme beauty and richness of kind of nature, mountains, ocean, but then also such extreme poverty, and seeing that kind of firsthand. If you had to fly into Cape Town airport, you see massive informal settlements with devastating living circumstances right next to like huge mansions on the mountains. And so just growing up with these extremes, I think for me built a huge motivation to try and alleviate that in some way or another. And kind of my journey into where I am now, which I'm sure we'll go into more, has kind of been coming closer and closer to that goal.
So, I would say like during this whole journey, as you mentioned, prior to engineering background and now investors, you are also like attracted by the dancing and performing world. So can you tell us a bit about those experience in itself? What did you learn during that journey that gave you, in a way, an edge to join the firm and in a way your position today?
Yeah. I think first of all, tenacity, like I think even through those knee injuries, and I'm sure most ballet dancers who've been in point shoes can attest to the fact that you just have to dance through the blisters and through the blood and the sweat and try and perfect things that are quite difficult, or definitely were difficult for me to get into shape. I mean, my surname's Wale, but they used to call me Caitlin Wild because I just wanted to be expressive and out there, and actually just trying to contain it and put in the hours and the discipline and practicing every night and every weekend was a really good practice for knowing that it's actually input equals And the more effort you put in upfront meant the more kind of effortless and enjoyable the performance. And when you come up to kind of game day and you do this big show, you can get lost in it. Um, and I think that's been a really applicable skill that I've been able to apply in any industry. Actually, it's just putting in that those long hours, hard work does result in more enjoyment, and I think better results.
So all of that, now you're investing in climate tech companies and startups. So before jumping into that climate tech industry, do you recall any like specific aha moments that you could define as such that was really the driver to jump into the industry?
I think I mean I've thought about this. It's for me it was very much a process of elimination and I started my career in mining, and it's so weird that now investing in carbon removal opportunities, we are looking at a number of mineralization opportunities that are using mine waste facilities. And so I've had an aha moment now that retrospectively it's helpful to have been in some parts of my career in mining and other parts of my career in building sustainability. But the actual process for that has helped me on that journey has very much been understanding what gives me energy and moving closer and closer to that kind of inception of companies and trying to help founders come over those barriers in different ways has been where I feel my piece of the puzzle is most return of kind of energy invested.
Okay, so let's take a zoom out now. And can you give us an overview of the carbon removal landscape today? But maybe prior to that, if you could give us a little bit of background to our listeners about the need of removing carbon from the atmosphere. I mean, why is it the time now?
Yeah, I mean, I there's a metaphor that I've heard which I find really helpful to conceptualize and to explain to people who aren't really we in the weeds of the space that carbon removal is almost like with a boat, there's holes in the boat and there's water rushing in. That's the planet. And the water is the carbon, and the more emissions we're putting out there, we have to deal with. So the kind of avoided emissions, so transitioning to renewable energy, electrifying transport, are all pieces of the puzzle of actually plugging in those holes and stopping more emissions coming into the boat. But then carbon removal is actually, once you've plugged up those holes, how do you scoop out that water and enable the boat to continue to the destination? And what's been very apparent as we've trying to unpick all the kind of data on how much carbon we need is that but in every IPCC scenario for how we get to 1.5 degrees, there is an assumed level of carbon removal, which is averaging on around 10 billion tons per year by 2050. And if we look at where we are right now, it's less than 1% of that. And so just like even thinking about by getting to that target by 2050, right now we need to be backing innovations that are doing it kind of the most innovative way, but also the most efficient way, promoting co-benefits. And there's so many different considerations, which I'll go into, which are kind of specific to the different themes. So I think that gives the high level picture of we have to go very far, very fast from almost a standing start. So we need to kind of carbon removal needs all the help it can get. But I just want to stress that we absolutely need carbon avoidance as well and circular economy. These are all pieces of the puzzle, but we specifically focus on the carbon removal need.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, and then to go into the kind of deeper part of it. So typically there's spoken about nature-based to engineered solutions, and there's a bunch of different ways of categorizing that. When you look at different removal pathways, the kind of two key ones or key mechanisms for drawdown are usually through photosynthesis, like through plants and things that happen naturally, and then through chemistry. And there are examples of where nature are doing this by themselves. And so how we at Counteract break these into themes are into kind of 6 core themes, which we talk about: oceans, forests, soil, biomass, direct air capture, and rocks or enhanced weathering. Um, and would now be a good time to go into a little bit of each of them and talk about what opportunities or issues we like to focus on.
Yeah, I would love to. Would love to go and if you can give us like for each of them a little bit of like the background. How does it work in terms of like in a way natural methods, challenges, like the benefits, but also like the engineering methods that can be associated to each of them.
Yeah, for sure. Um, well, I'll go through them and kind of talk about some of the practices that exist and the potential co-benefits, and then the issues that we care about, which will evolve as the kind of knowledge in the space does. But starting with soil carbon, so the potential capacity in soil is huge. I think there's an estimate of 2 to 5 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year in soil alone. But there are issues with how you measure that, and how much of that is temporary versus part of a cycle. And there are practices that have proven to increase the soil's ability to hold the carbon, such as conservative or regenerative agriculture. So more commonly, this could be no tilling and planting of cover crops as examples of what could be done. But then also there's bioengineering of specific microbes that can enhance kind of the plant's ability to draw down the carbon and store it more permanently in the soil. Um, and this kind of carbon is one mechanism for measuring how successful that is, but there are a whole heap of co-benefits of both of these kind of natural practices, but also engineered practices, which include water retention, less agrochemicals that are required for fertilizers, improved profitability for farmers. And these are areas that we are trying to kind of look at where the issues are and invest in opportunities that are overcoming them. And so we kind of identify maybe 3 key issues being in the measurement, reporting, and verification of soil carbon. And I think this is evident in examples like Microsoft, who puts out tenders for lots of nature-based solutions for carbon removal, but then I think less than 2% of the soil applications were actually approved because of this MRV monitoring, reporting, and verification that was applied. And I can talk about a portfolio company we've invested in this space.
Mm-hmm.
But then also the kind of permanence, or in carbon removal, they talk about durability. So how long the carbon is being removed from the atmosphere is the measure that's ultimately you want to be measuring and increasing. And specifically in the farming landscape, it's very much a behavioral barrier there is present, and farmers knowing about the benefits of some of these more conservative agricultural practices is one of the key barriers that some awesome startups are overcoming. And then I'll just move on to forests,
Mm-hmm.
which I think in the carbon market you can also call above ground biomass. Um, but more broadly, forests, this could be reforestation, afforestation, or forest conservation. Each of have their own attributes to how they're pulling down carbon, and whether it's durable or kind of short term. But I think some of the key issues to highlight is that it can take decades to sequester the carbon through trees or above ground biomass, sometimes up to 100 years. And each tree has its own profile for how the carbon gets stored into it. And the methods for deploying these kind of carbon credits through trees are rifled with ethical considerations, like who currently is on that land and how is that land currently being used. Um, and so innovations we look for are we're hoping to try and promote kind of co-benefits like biodiversity. So it's not just planting trees, but it's planting a biodiverse environment that can sequester the most carbon and help support other life forms. And then that also helps with things like tolerance to flooding, and provide additional commercial benefit to the local owners. And we're definitely seeing a need for more robust data coming from MRV monitoring, reporting and verification in this space.
Yeah, because sorry
And
to
then
interrupt, but it
yeah,
sounds that
no,
the forest and like this lovely greenwashing of a lot of companies like plant a tree and then we offset our carbon emission that way. It's way more complex than that. So do you see any like interesting companies that you guys have looked at and started to invest, or you see that in that sense there is already a lot of actors in the place that you should push and look at other solution?
yeah, absolutely. So full disclaimer, we've invested in a company that is specifically targeted in the space called Chloris Geospatial. And we have looked at a number of innovations in the space, which is great, like Pachama, NCR. And why we specifically liked Chloris is basically what they're using is leveraging technology like satellite imagery and spaceborne LiDAR with very robust scientific proof of how kind of these trees in these different environments are evolving. So they're known as allometric equations, which is basically the relationship between different characteristics that can be seen, and being able to draw, at breast height, the height of the tree and the volume of the biomass, and trying to create those relationships. This team has been founded on kind of over 20 years of experience of actually taking those measurements and conducting that research by hand, as well as looking at how you can build the most robust algorithms to use that data to train the models, which are then real time interpreting it. And why that's helpful is that you can then get a very like high level representation of what's happening on the ground. So for instance, if you're planting trees and then there's a fire in 5 years' time, you're going to get an immediate alert that actually there's something happening on the ground. So you're seeing what's happening, almost how they call it is stock and flow. So you've got almost an image of what's happening with the carbon in the above ground biomass, but then also how that carbon is fluctuating with time. And you can go to a jurisdictional level and see, okay, we've got a forest the size of, the Amazon, and this is how it's performed over the last 5 years. And if we buy more credits in the space, this is how we would expect it to. And just providing more granular data and certainty around the data that you're viewing empowers the project selector, the buyer, the owner of those credits to see what's happening on an ongoing basis.
Okay. So I think we covered already a little bit like the forest. Which one do you want to cover now? Direct air capture, rocks, biomass?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I mean, let what you choose.
Let's go with direct air capture. It's always,
Yeah.
this exciting silver bullet that people think putting those massive fan, outside, and it's very visual. So it sounds like, okay, we're gonna be able to capture all the carbon of the atmosphere, but it sounds that it's way more than that. So tell us a bit more about the specificity of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think, just taking a step back, something that I found really helpful to see is Project Drawdown have created this framework which shows of all the kind of carbon emissions that are coming each year, kind of over 50%, usually it's 55%, are going into the atmosphere, and then the remaining percentage is going into land and ocean. And so we were talking about some examples of soil and forest that's in the land, but it's the kind of remaining 55% that's building and accumulating in the atmosphere, which we need other mechanisms for drawing down. And that's what direct air capture is doing. But it's can only be half of the puzzle, because once you've captured it, you also have to find a place to store it. But just looking at the capturing point, the process, I guess, or including the storage, can be split into three kind of key stages. One is the capture of the CO2, one is the release of the CO2, and then one is the storage, which is where you put it long term. And all of them need to be considered with the innovations you're looking in. And the capture can be done through kind of solid sorbents or liquid solvents. And typically those have been kind of materials that like to hold onto the CO2. So when you then thinking about releasing it, it can be very energy intensive. So there are different ways of doing this, either through electrochemistry or thermo pressure swing, which are creating environments that make it kind of preferable for those materials to capture and then release the CO2 downstream. But then after that, you still need to think about, okay, what's happening with that CO2? Are you going to be injecting it into geological storage points or into rocks or minerals? Or is that going to be utilized in kind of products? And if it is utilized into products, how long is that lifespan of the product? I mean, there's some companies like, I think even our soda streams, that CO2, you could take that from the air, but if you are then putting it back into sparkling water, then that's just going straight back into the atmosphere. So you have to consider the durability of these different applications, and the kind of energy intensity of the capture and release, and also the transportation, because it's all part of the question. And even if it is going into underground storage, their considerations around leakage and how to ensure the safety and that there aren't other cracks that it's going to end up pushing out oil and other reserves. And so innovations that we're excited about are ones that are creating routes to safely remove the carbon dioxide in a way that you can hopefully guarantee the durability. Ones that are creating environments that either can decentralize where you're placing the kind of capture units, and then also bringing the energy intensity down. So you're not having to use natural gas to heat a calcinator to degrees like north of 500. That means that you're just kind of pulling out more fossil fuels to split out the CO2. You're on mute.
Sorry. How do you see
Good.
I wanted to make sure there's no background noise on my side. So how do you see like the proportion of like direct air capture compared to more of those natural process that are in a way empowered and accelerated by some engineering system? Do you see DSE like that sounds like the less natural in a way process that you have in your list in the area. So what's the percentage you think really like that's mandatory, or you think that I mean, according to your personal opinion and experience that you have, it's needed to compensate all the natural other ways that are existing today?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And I think if you asked every one of us in the team, we'd all have a different answer. Um, I think that we are in agreement that we need all the solutions and we kind of need all the help that we can get. So part of our mandate is to back a diverse range of opportunities, ranging from the nature-based side to the engineered ones. And in engineered opportunities, direct air capture is the most kind of common referred to example. There is definitely a need for this, and it's also one of the most concrete, measurable ways of being able to remove carbon. Um, and so we absolutely see the need for it, and that's probably represented in our portfolio, which I'm trying to think. I think we've got two currently that are specifically direct air capture, but then also a number of sequestration channels. So and I think that will evolve. We'd like a balanced kind of nature-based to engineered solutions. But even with the nature-based ones, it's not necessarily investing in the forests or the soil per se. It's investing in the technology that we think is going to enable that.
Enable that and accelerate the
Yeah.
process, the natural process in a way. Tell us
Exactly.
a bit more about like maybe ocean and rocks. I think that's the
Hmm.
two. And probably biomass. Did you cover that one?
Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
not yet.
Not yet. So let's go
Um,
with the ocean. It's always like we hear so many
sure.
interesting part of it. So would love to learn more about it.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of split the ocean one. There's a few within the ocean. I think it's good to know a huge amount is currently stored in the ocean, like disproportionately large. But a lot of that's in kind of calcified carbon that's at the bottom of the ocean. And so how we split it out is biological, chemical, and engineered carbon. So going with the first kind of biological is coastal restoration, or more typically known blue carbon, micro and macro algae cultivation, which each of them have their own kind of considerations you need to think about. Ocean iron fertilization, which there have been trials that were done off the coast of Canada in the past and created a lot of kind of negative press, but they still are being explored. Um, and then on the chemical side, ocean alkalinity enhancement. So trying to put in more alkaline substances into the ocean, which subsequently would help increase the ocean's ability to take up more carbon. And then on the engineered front is kind of deep sea storage and ocean upwelling or downwelling. I think with each of these different systems, there's always a consideration of kind of trade-offs, as with biomass, which we'll come to. So looking at if you are creating, for instance, macroalgae for carbon removal, unless you are doing something to permanently store that or store it in a long-term usage, then there's question about, should you be prioritizing food supplements or the potential to avoid methane in cow food versus carbon removal? And so there's lots of trade-offs the with the different considerations. Um, and yeah, it's just thinking the other one that's really important to consider is there's all these different currents. And for instance, with the ocean iron fertilization, where there was this big plume example, is you don't know how that in maybe the North Sea is going to affect something in the Southern Hemisphere, and how all these currents interact with each other, and maybe increased kind of fertilization in one front might decrease food population in another. So I think there's just a lot of care that needs to be taken when backing opportunities in the space. And for instance, one of the companies we've backed, Sequestrate, a big portion of the investment also went into conducting the marine research for this sequestration channel.
It's
And
exciting.
then
I feel like each of those area could be like a dedicated podcast on it. There's so much to discover and so much to
I
cover. And I'm very impressed by the amount of knowledge that you're able to share with us. Thank you so much. So keep going on the ocean front. I feel we just scratch the surface here.
don't probe too far, because I think even all of us say we kind of feel like imposters, because there's so much. As you kind of scratch the surface, you just see
Yeah.
how much there is. So I think it's evolving with time, and this will constantly change. But quickly moving on to biomass,
Hmm.
there's we call it internally as Biker's opportunity. So I think BECS was biomass energy, carbon capture and storage, and there's been different analyses which are questioning whether turning biomass into an energy source and then carbon capture is the most efficient route, and Bikers is kind of a higher level encapsulation that would also consider things like biomass growth and then direct burial. Um, but just this in itself has many different arms. The kind of key areas that we focus on are feedstocks. So looking at, for instance, municipal waste or bioenergy crops like miscanthus or algae even are all being used as feedstock for biomass for carbon removal. And then also the conversion process. So, is it biochemical or is it thermochemical? And what are the different kind of ratios between different processes like gasification or pyrolysis, and how do those different factors affect the end kind of carbon result? And we actually have a research analyst conducting a big paper on this at the moment, which is kicking up really interesting findings, and maybe a different podcast to go into. But it is interesting as you kind of pull back the layers, how much more you can find. And then on the storage piece, like with direct air capture, this is not a chemical, this is more looking at photosynthesis as the mechanism for drawing down the carbon, but then you've also got to consider the storage. Is it going into geological places or land storage, such as biochar or burial?
Yeah,
And
some companies like Carpfix, for instance, you probably well know them, that were on the show recently. Definitely, this mineralization of the CO2 was a very interesting process in itself.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think with all these different channels, that storage piece is a big question. And the mineralization or the enhanced weathering angle provides some compelling evidence, because if you know that it's turning into a very durable product like a rock, which can have a long time frame, and it's being stored underground, then that creates a lot more certainty over that state. Do you want me to move on to enhanced weathering some more, or do you feel like we've gone into enough?
No, I think we thanks to you, we got a little like snacking on of each of those area, and I think a little bit more than that, definitely. And thank you so much for sharing all of that. As I mentioned, I think each of those area will require like a dedicated deep dive into it, but I'd like to understand from you, zooming out a little bit out of all of those areas, like, do you see any areas like today that is like the most active one, where there is the most investment, and where, in a way, there is the most potential at short term to really start to capture the CO2 out of the atmosphere?
I mean, I feel like those questions would probably differ per investor. I think trends that we're seeing are, so in the data validation in the forestry space, for instance, that I think has taken the shape of much more typical tech venture style, where it's lots of platform data play and can scale as a tech startup would. In the direct air capture front, I think there are quite a few companies that are, or VC funds rather, that are wanting to invest because they know that that's kind of down the line, that technology needs to be kind of operational at scale. And it's almost like, I almost think about it in comparison to the solar panel. We're in the phase of proving what's the most efficient PV module. But then as soon as that's been landed on, and probably there'll be a number, then we need to scale up really quickly to the project finance stage, and that's a whole different kettle of fish. But to your question about the short-term carbon removal potential, I think we see biomass as a huge one, and there's some really exciting biomass companies that we are in the process of closing opportunities with at the moment, which I'd love to speak to you about down the line.
Definitely, would love to. So biomass, according to you, is like the fastest. I mean, the low hanging fruit that we should go for, and that you guys are looking at. If you take a little bit like the overall ecosystem, I mean, we know that, and you use this wonderful example of the boat taking water, and how can we scoop it out through carbon removal. I thought that was a very interesting one. So really to contribute to this 2015 net zero goal, I mean, what is the situation today? Do you see like anything blocking that you have identified? Do we need like maybe new policies in place to accelerate that? Maybe it's like fundings, and I think fundings, as we see this year on the venture side, has been really accelerating, but not everyone is investing in carbon capture. Or maybe it's like still like, as you mentioned, we're still looking for data, we're still looking to understand which area can be, in a way accelerated through engineering in itself. What is the block that we have? Like, what do we need to remove in a way to really feel that, okay, now we have things in hands to support that goal and we can make it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think there are multiple answers.
I know,
I
but
think,
please,
I
let's
think
start with by the first one.
I think the first three thoughts that rush to my head are, so to your policy question, I think definitely this is definitely an area that I don't pretend to understand how best to incentivize, or whether it's a reward or a carrot or stick methodology. But certainly if there were a carbon tax floor set at $100 per ton, that would certainly help open the floodgates in the space. There's a carbon take back obligation that I heard about, which was really compelling, which suggested that companies that are still relying on fossil fuels and will be very hard to transition, such as aviation, should be the same companies that offset through the most durable carbon removal means. So, for instance, if carbon offsets, you can currently go onto carbon offset marketplaces and buy offsets from something that was supposed to be a coal mine and instead became a wind farm or something like that, where it's actually not removing anything from the atmosphere. If you then mandated that fossil fuel dependent companies had to buy the most durable offsets, for instance, direct air capture and geological storage, then that would really help the kind of polluters pay more, because it's much more expensive to buy offsets from that. And then more voluntary kind of companies that have targets to be net zero could be supporting initiatives that are having additional co-benefits, such as biodiversity enhancement, as well as kind of carbon and soil. And then I think the final one, which is probably most relevant to kind of investors in this space, is just, I guess, being mindful of previous kind of clean tech booms, and I'm sure you've seen is how there's been a lot more interest and investment in the space, and the multiples are shooting through the roof. How to really make sure that we're backing opportunities that are taking into consideration, not just enabling more fossil fuels to be drawn, or potentially putting out a whole lot of food sources to try and do this carbon removal. So just being mindful of the other social and environmental targets, whilst also focusing on the carbon removal and supporting these opportunities through growth challenges.
And on the tech side, on the solution side, because it sounds like the investment side, I mean, we just covered the policy side as well. On the tech side, you see that there's still like a long way to go to really like optimize those different solutions, or maybe this new solution that needs to be put in place, because what we have today is not really efficient. It's more like a patch on the whole. How do you see? I mean, in a timeline of 1 to 10, are we like around 3, 6, 7 in terms of like maturity, or in those in terms of those solution? How would you consider that based on your knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would change for the different carbon removal pathways. So I think thinking of direct air capture, that would be much on the 1 to 10 scale. I would probably say is still on like the 3. But then biomass opportunities, because there's not necessarily a huge amount that needs to happen if you're growing and burying, for example, then that could be closer to the 7. I think the ocean one would also be very much on the earlier stage. Probably also, I'd say, less than 4. And then, yeah, I'm just thinking where I'd place soil, probably bang in the middle. We know the mechanisms for doing it, but actually helping enable that transition is a different story. And there was another one. Which one am I forgetting?
Yeah, probably rocks. Did you mention that one?
Yeah, I think with rocks, it's I I don't know where I'd place rocks because there's the know-how that can be taken from kind of from mining and
Yeah.
reversing it. So knowing how kind of technology deep underground behaves in some mechanisms is very known, but in other, so you could say half of that spectrum is on the 6-7. But then on the other hand is knowing how things are going to behave if you are introducing it to an ocean environment or looking at a new mechanism for accelerating it is probably on the 3-4. So that's probably wide ranging.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you so much for covering this extensive landscape and giving us all of those insights. And I hope we didn't lose anyone along the way. But anyway, you should guys have a look at the website of the Counteract. They really have like amazing resource and data regarding all of those different areas in itself. Thank you, Caitlin, for sharing that. So let's go now into the specific of Counteract. Except if you have something that you would like to add regarding the landscape in itself. Otherwise, I will invite you to to tell us a bit about the story. Who are the founders? Why did they started the firm? And what is the thesis behind it?
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to move on to that. Um, I think so. Speaking about Counteract and maybe talking about the founders a bit, is they have backgrounds as serial entrepreneurs. They kind of found each other in earlier careers, and how they describe it is in kind of fintech before it was called fintech, and they were developing the first card, and that was acquired by Lloyd's Bank, and they had some early endeavors in different startups, and then they started a company called Essence, which is a kind of data-driven media and tech company, which helped a number of big companies such as Google think about their kind of storytelling and strategy around advertising and how to really have a data-driven approach in this kind of market, which was really at that stage very early on and undefined. And from the stories they've told, that's given some really good experience on commercializing, international expansion, thinking about communication and storytelling, and negotiating contracts with, you know, key corporates, but also acquiring different other startups to be part of this growing machine, all with the mission of kind of data-led approach. And they did a sale to WPP, and I think Andrew was the last one who stayed there to see through that transition. And he's been kind of having Contract as his brainchild baby for the past few years, and basically got the team back together after having landscaped the market, saying how do we take kind of what we've learned and the success that we've been fortunate to get to help the planet, and looked at things from kind of plastics in the ocean, which we definitely need, and a whole bunch of other things, and landed on carbon removal, specifically being a space that at this very early stage, there's a lot of ideas and great innovations that could be hugely catalytic, but the kind of hurdles are very much around that early financing where VCs are maybe not ready to take that risk because it's such an unformed market, or even the communication. Some of them, as we've discussed, are very deeply technical, and being able to communicate the need for it as well as the like what's unique about the company is a specific skill. And with all startups, but very much specific in how we have to scale in the carbon removal space, is is that rapid scale is like uh, something that I think you have to have lived firsthand to really know some of the pains and small wins. So anyway, that's a background on the founders and how they landed on carbon removal in the space. Um, and my background was kind of I was before Counteract a deep tech investor at Octopus Ventures, and still with my kind of passion for climate tech, having been in the mining space and then sustainability and renewable energy before moving into deep tech VC. I was hosting a roundtable around net zero for VCs. And people like Pippa Gawley, who I know is also on your podcast
Yeah.
recently, just understanding how investors who've done great investments in the space are measuring success, like more than just the financial representation. Um, and this is how I met the Counteract team pre-launch, and I was very lucky to join them on day one, which was earlier this year in February.
Fantastic. And what is I mean the thesis behind Counteract? Do you have like
Yeah,
any specifics that you could share? And maybe then we
sure.
can use that as a good segue in terms of like what do you offer to those founders that you invest in? I mean, what are the challenges that you see that you guys try to cover? And I think commercialization is one of them that you mentioned previously.
Hmm. Yeah, sure. So our thesis, we kind of have four criteria that we kind of look at for every opportunity. And I'll quickly run through those. So one is this opportunity catalytic? So both does this help create a line of sight to 0.5 gigaton removal by 2050 cumulatively, either directly or indirectly? And also, does having Counteract around the table add to that catalysis, if you like? So, i.e., we wouldn't want to just elbow into deals where there are already a lot of investors that are around the table. That's great because then there's already a lot of money there. But sometimes in those cases, having us around the table for the additional things that we like to bring would make sense. And so that's how we define catalytic. The three others are, as I mentioned, diverse. So backing a range from nature-based to engineered solutions, because quite frankly, we need them all.
Mm-hmm.
Self-sustaining. So this is a big one. This is, does the business model make sense such that when the company's at scale, they don't need to continuously fundraise to grow. They can actually self-sustain and scale with the markets. And we believe the best companies will do this. So we try to find those opportunities early on. And also if their business model isn't such that it's there yet, that's how we will sometimes work with the companies to help them figure out. And the final one is a really important one, which is it responsible? So is it it's trying to find opportunities that are not negatively impacting on other environmental objectives and promoting a just transition where possible. So how we define that just transition is also considering different voices and representation, for instance, from the global south in this kind of carbon transition so that we don't trace old pathways in the same way. Um, yeah, I hope that answered the questions.
Definitely. But regarding the founders in itself that you invest in, like, can you tell us a bit more about like the way you position yourself in terms of like the support that you're able
Mm-hmm.
to bring to them, regarding in a way like the challenges that you identify that most of the time in that specific industry they can have.
Yeah, sure. So we like to have catchy phrases, but we've kind of put it into four C's. So one is capital, which is kind of obvious if you're a VC investor, but looking at the pre-seed, seed stage opportunity, so typically 250 to 1 million first tickets. Then community, so being the currently the only carbon removal only focused VC fund, we will have built up this community of both investors but also startups and also off-takers who we have kind of regular catch-ups with, and so being able to connect those different players we see as a key enabler in the market. And communication. So as I mentioned, the founders have background in kind of media, tech, advertising, and helping these early stage startups, both with even press releases and how they kind of attract talent and whatnot. Just that whole story and how you kind of evolve it with time is something that we are very open and provide hands-on help where we can. And then the final one is commercialization, as we discussed earlier. But also having a broad base of venture partners, so entrepreneurs who want to give back and are interested in the space, being able to pull them in, and experts to say, it's specific to this space. Maybe we don't know about that specific sorbent material, but we know about scaling, and we can bring in this kind of expert to help you with that specific problem.
Okay, so let's speak a little bit about cash here. What are according to you, the most promising, in a way, area that I call like impact, that can create impact cash return, or ICR, meaning like, building those impactful companies while creating highly profitable business. Do you see any like underdog subsector of those 6 areas that you mentioned previously, that you're excited about it, and where it really can have this, exciting return opportunities as well, that maybe investors listening to the show would be interesting to look at?
Sorry, can you rephrase that? So return on impact, or
Yeah, so which sector are the most promising for you today in terms of like what we call impact cash return? So in this carbon capture landscape, we mentioned like different areas. Which one do you think have like the most opportunities to create highly profitable business while having a big impact as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's so specific on the companies that I think it would be hard to find trends between specific avenues and their potential impact,
Mm-hmm.
and return on cash. We certainly see in some areas where the company isn't only dependent on carbon credits revenues, that, for instance, we've backed this awesome soil carbon uh, measurement company that is all about ground truthing, and volume is key. In that case, they're not generating revenues from carbon removal opportunities. They're generating revenue from sampling. And so that's one example where the more volume, the more data, the better the credits you can get. So the better the farmer, the more volume, the cheaper the products and the cheaper the samples. But at the same time, that could head to rapid growth in the company. So super excited about that. But then on the flip side, direct air capture, for instance, is one that will only be funded from carbon revenues, whether it's through companies that are trying to offset, or however it may be, whatever structure it is. I think where we see huge opportunities in those are the ones that can really bring that cost down to less than $100 per ton of carbon removed or captured, and also looking at how those can be powered in ways that are not costing the planet, excuse the pun, but powered by renewable energy and able to scale. That's where we really see those kind of. So that's both ends of the spectrum, and examples where we see huge potential. But all the companies we look at have that self-sustaining opportunity.
Okay, so what's next for Counteract?
Well, I don't know what I'm allowed to say publicly, but we are wanting to further our impact. And I'm happy to talk about that in more detail with anyone who'd like to. Oh, sorry. But what's next for us? We are growing a lot. Our team has already grown by 2 since us 4 started in February, and we will likely be recruiting more. We are looking to make a bunch more investments. We are looking to get more permanent office space, or not necessarily permanent, but we've been quite mobile and looking forward to having a more permanent base, and that will be news in the new year. And we've got a couple of biomass opportunities that are going to be coming onto our page, which we're very excited about. Hoping to get more in the ocean space, kind of the bio side of it. And excited to see how we can bring more of the global south into the equation. And this is an ongoing discussion, which very happy to pick up with.
Fantastic. So Last question regarding Counteract, and after, as I told you, I would ask you your opinion regarding the climate crisis and the role of a woman in the climatic ecosystem. So, in terms of impact, I mean, you mentioned this. I think if I don't mistake, it's like 5 gigaton that you guys are, in a way targeting to be removed by the portfolios of companies that you're investing in. But how do you measure this impact? Do you rely on a specific framework that you built in house, or do you have like a network of scientists that gives you data or look at what you do? How does it work?
Great question. And this is a very live debate that we are having. Um, Frameworks that we have looked at have been very helpful include the IRIS Plus taxonomy, which basically considers the Sustainable Development Goals. It also considers the impact management project's 5 dimensions of impact. So who, how much, risk, contribution, and scale. And looking at, I don't know if you are familiar with the EU taxonomy, that, the European EU taxonomy have produced sustainable finance guidelines for different considerations that you need to be thinking about if you're investing in climate mitigation or adaptation strategies. So these are all frameworks that we've been overlapping and seeing how we use it best in-house, and it's something that's evolving for us. And I think the answer to how you measure that is something that is probably going to crystallize, because it is difficult when you are forecasting a startup's impact, especially if you've got some that are direct removal and others that are kind of knock-on effect. How we analyze each company internally for our investment committee is saying what would have to be true for this specific company to enable 0.5 gigaton removal by 2050. And maybe by doing that, you see, okay, well, you'd have to capture 120% of a certain, plastic portion of the market. And is that something that we want to be helping enable? Yes or no? And other ones, it would be how much capex or how much capital would have to be raised to enable the capex funding of this direct air capture unit to scale to that. And do we think that there's a linear pathway to getting that? And it just really helps stimulate discussion about what would have to be true in a future to enable that. And if there are enough companies that we back that do meet that, then that 0.5 gigaton will hopefully be even superseded.
I know it's always the challenging part for any firms that I've been speaking to. Like everybody's kind of like trying to find his way to really like stick to what they do and what they are wishing for. Really like in terms of removing carbon, or at least the impact that they are seeking to have with the investment that they do. So, two last question. Your personal view on the climate crisis. I mean, as I always ask, are we doomed? What would you say to people who feel demoralized, by all of those terrible news and already visible consequences that we see of about climate change?
I I am a hopeless uh, optimist, but I think that's necessary sometimes. I think if you look at humans in the past, we've been able to adapt to very extreme circumstances where we live. And apparently, and I haven't fact checked this, but apparently back in the day before the car was invented, in the UK, there was so much horse poo that was piling up that it almost reached the windows of people's houses. And everyone was like, we're doomed. We're not going to be able to operate in cities anymore. And then the car was invented. And I think just if you have to look at where we've been, and I think what will be really crucial in this kind of trying to overcome the doom of climate change is drawing inspiration from nature. So biomimicry, learning from kind of an ecosystem that has evolved over time and seeing how we can help nature do it better will be absolutely crucial. Huge fan of lots of biomimicry learnings and how that can be applied to engineering and the likes. And then also just trying to challenge ourselves to not get caught up in the same ways of measuring success that we have in the past. Like if you're investing, into climate tech opportunities, it's important to ask the question, how are you measuring that impact beyond just the financial return? So great questions, and I think it's good to keep that debate live and moving, because that needs to evolve as we evolve our understanding of what's needed. But yeah, quite frankly, I'm very excited about the different opportunities ranging from the engineered to the nature-based, because as I mentioned before, I think we need it all.
Exciting! Thank you so much for putting some hope into this darker area. Even though I'm speaking with only optimistic people right now in that sense, so it's super exciting. So, how do you see the place for women in the climate tech ecosystem? Do you believe that they have an important role to play in the fight against climate change? I believe so, and I mean, we've been seeing so many interesting and incredible women like you coming on the show, taking action at different level in the ecosystem. So, what's your take on that?
I always struggle with this question. I've even been, I think, interviewed on CNN for when I was a mechanical engineering master's student, being like, what's it like being an engineer? And to be honest, I think as a population, we roughly 50-50. And I think that that's so important in every kind of representation that we have. And like with different beliefs, there's the yin and yang, and there are stereotypical traits that you could say are female, but maybe they are in a male or whatever gender you identify with. I think what is important is bringing in diversity, not only of gender, but also of kind of thought and circumstances, and as mentioned about the global south, and bringing that into conversation. I did look up some general stats, and I think it's pretty well known that female founders and female investors have been less represented in the space, and also that kind of the feminine nature is a lot more about family and preservation and future looking kind of preservation. So I think that application in the climate space is huge, and it's great to see how numbers where you've got balanced representation of females and males in companies are very successful and more likely to get to later rounds, and also to see that investors who have female representation in the team are also fighting for more female-led companies. And I was very, very lucky to learn a lot about kind of female investing from my old manager at Octopus, Zoe Chambers, who's an absolute superstar in the space. And I think you can see her profile, that the numbers of startups that she's backed that have amazing female founders who are the first ones to call her up and feel that kind of faith in the system is really awesome and a huge role model for me.
Thank you so much. So, how can the community of investors, founders, experts listening to the show today can help you?
I think helping me just figure out what it is that gives you that energy. And I'm sure that loads of people are feeling that about trying to help this climate movement, and just take the risk of jumping in if you've got an idea, or you're thinking about joining a startup, or you're thinking about moving into investing in the space. Just reach out to people and connect. I think the power of connectivity is so underrated, and just being bold and demanding that it can be better is something I'd encourage everyone. And finding what your superpower is and what you're passionate about will help all of us. Cliche, I know, but that's how I genuinely feel.
Okay, so any question I should have asked I did not during this first part of the interview?
Yeah, I think probably just encouraging. Actually, yes, I would really encourage more PhD students and academics and masters and anyone who's got a strong affinity for figuring out how to break the boundaries in science to think about how that can also commercialize. Because I think there's a lack of connectivity in the space that's taking the evolving science and then applying it to the evolving kind of companies, and being able to bridge that gap either through joining startups or creating startups. I think there's a huge ecosystem waiting to invest in opportunities, and would love to help make that connectivity.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, for your time and your incredible insights on the carbon capture landscape and industry. As I said, I feel like we just scratched the top of it, and we should definitely dedicate for each of those subcategories a full podcast and a real deep dive. So I'm so excited to see so many brilliant people like you putting so much effort to move the ball towards a better and cleaner world. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, G, and straight back at you. And well done for doing this, and look forward to seeing all the other people you bring onto your show.
Hi, it's Guillaume again. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. As I said, do not hesitate to share an episode with a friend. Also, if you value the work we do for the climate tech ecosystem, here is how you can contribute to it. Today, I'm asking for your support and a donation or sponsorship to make the work of our self-funded team more viable. Even a small contribution means a lot to us. In any case, I will invite you to subscribe to our channels and visit our website startupbasecamp.org to discover more episodes like this one. And get your membership to access all our members' exclusive content. So remember, all of this is possible because of your support and donation. And we want you to be part of this collective movement against climate change. Let's keep in touch, and I hope you will enjoy our next show with us.